This program will be a panel-style discussion in which each of our 4 guest speakers will be reflecting on a performance by a Black artist that is significant to them. The program will be moderated by Columbus's own Hanif Abdurraqib in celebration for his recently released book, A Little Devil in America, Notes in Praise of Black Performance. And finally, a few words about our guest speakers this evening. Hanif Abdurraqib is a poet, essayist, and cultural critic from Columbus, Ohio. With Big Lux, he released a limited edition chapbook, Vintage Sadness, in summer 2017. You can't get it anymore, and he's very sorry. His first collection of essays, They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us, was released in winter 2017 by $2 Radio and was named a Book of the Year by numerous publications. He released Go Ahead in the Rain, Notes to a Tribe Called Quest, with University of Texas Press in February 2019. The book became a New York Times bestseller, was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and was longlisted for the National Book Award. His second collection of poems, A Fortune for Your Disaster, was released in 2019 by Tin House and won the 2020 Lenore Marshall Prize. In 2021, he released the book A Little Devil in America with Random House. He is a graduate of Beechcroft High School. Dionne Custer Edwards is the Director of Learning and Public Practice at the Wexner Center for the Arts, where she oversees education programming and has pioneered several groundbreaking education programs, including Pages, an art and writing program serving hundreds of high school students a year from across Central Ohio. Embedded in her art and education practices is Dionne's commitment to work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Dionne has received awards and fellowships for her work in the arts, including a 12-month fellowship with Americans for the Arts and 2 nominations. Two nominations for a Greater Columbus Arts Council Community Arts Partnership Award. And Dionne has presented and been a featured speaker at several national conferences on her work and research in arts education. Dionne has an MA in Arts Education and Creative Writing from Antioch University and a BA in English from Ohio State University. Dr. Mark Lomax II is a critically acclaimed composer, recording artist, drummer, activist, and educator. In one of the timeliest and unprecedented pieces of work in our history, Lomax released 400, an African epic, in January 2019. This magnum opus consists of a 12-album cycle, a curriculum, and a documentary that ambitiously tells the story of the African diaspora. Divided into thirds, the epic explores thousands of years of the history that is pre-colonial Africa, the Ma'afa, which is 400 years between 1619 and 2019, and Afrofuturism, expressing a vision of what Blacks in America will heal toward the next 400 years. Dr. Lomax holds a Doctor of Music Arts degree in composition from The Ohio State University. And Paisha Thomas is a local artist and advocate for justice. She is currently working on a contract with Faith in Public Life as racial justice campaign coordinator. In the summer of 2020, amid civil unrest, Paisha co-founded Say It Loud Columbus, Music for the Movement. In addition to music, she creates ceramic pottery and sculptures. So thank you so much to Hanif, Dr. Lomax, Dionne, and Paisha for being here this evening. Hanif, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks to the library and all the work that everyone did. You know, when I first dreamed up local stuff, I was dreaming of a world where I could just kind of talk to as many local artists I love as possible, and maybe have some of the conversations that we would normally have, like in real life, just in front of people. And so Dionne and Dr. Lomax and Paisha were people I was excited about, mostly because our interests in art stem from similar places, but we sometimes work in different mediums than each other or approach those mediums differently. And it felt like a good opportunity to kind of gather and honor those mediums and our differences in them. So it's interesting because I feel like what initially was going to happen and what I think we're driven to is maybe different, but I still would love to see the clips that Mark and Paisha picked. And eventually I'm going to share my screen and play a couple things that aren't too long. But I think we're going to just talk a bit because we haven't seen each other in a long time, which is, also sad in a way. So I just want to welcome the 3 of you and we can get underway.
Well, I think first we should congratulate you, Hanif, on your new book. That's what's up, man. Congratulations. I look forward to reading it, and thank you for getting us all here to have a conversation.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I just started reading today, and I went straight to Going Home as Performance. And the story about the bird, it hit me right away. We can talk about that later. But yeah, and also you're famous at Barnes and Noble, so
Am I?
yeah.
I haven't been inside one in years. What do you mean? Is there a picture of me somewhere?
I said I'm looking for a book that I need to pick up today. And I said it's by Hanif Abdurraqib. And she goes, "Oh, I think I have one left. I'll go check." She had two left, but that was it. But she knew what I was looking for.
Yeah. I'm very I mean, one way, I mean, I'm thankful for Columbus in a million different ways, but the love that has been shown to the book since it's released in the city has been nice. Unfortunately, that means that it's sold out a lot of places, but I guess that's an okay problem to have. It could be the alternative. But that's dope. I really appreciate that. And thanks for going out and picking it up.
Yeah, I wanted the hard copy. So.
I know I got the hard copy too. I got an autographed one, but I don't know, Hanif, I'm gonna have to hit you up for something a little more personalized than this little situation, but we'll have to talk about that
Yeah,
later.
you know, it's funny. I did not know that this was a thing, but so Random House sent me like 3,000 just blank pages, and I had to sign them, just like sign my name on them repeatedly over the course of like a month. And they just sewed those pages into the book in lieu of like in-person book signings. They just sewed the pages in the book. So yeah, apparently. Apparently, I had no idea. But that, you know, shout out to the book workers who did that, because that seems like a really awful repetitive work.
Yeah, I got mine at Gramercy in Bexley. So
shout out to
right
Gramercy.
Right across from the library. I know, shout out to the library, shout out to Gramercy. Yeah. So.
Mark, would you play, or can we, I don't know if you have the ability to play your clip, but if you could talk about your clip before we watch it, I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, cool. I've got it queued up right here. It's John Coltrane, right?
All right. So let me say something about it, and then we can listen to it, because I think context is everything. Mm-hmm. So, okay, I'm a preacher's kid, and I grew up playing in church since I was 6 years old, but I was precocious, and I didn't want to just be a drummer. I wanted to be an artist. And, you know, as you kind of intend things and focus on things, the universe sends people your way to help. And there was a drummer named James Elliott, we call him Smooth, who heard me playing at a Methodist church of all places, and convinced my mom to take me out to Jazz and Eggs at the Marble Game. And I met Hank Marr and Gene Walker and all these Columbus legends in the music folks call jazz. And I became enamored and enthralled with that improvised music, that creative music, that Black, soulful, beautiful music. And started trying to play that stuff in church, and everybody's like, no, 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 no. And my grandmother and others, you know, condemned me for going into the world, as it were. And in searching for some kind of, I don't know if it was a sign or anything, but I was searching for something. And I came across John Coltrane's Love Supreme, and everything just made sense. Like it was the one record that I heard when I was around 14 that let me know that everything everybody was trying to tell me that music was in the church, and everything everybody was trying to tell me that music was in clubs and concert halls, could actually all be synthesized into one expression. And the record is not only deeply spiritual, but it's deeply personal. And it's probably one of his most authentic records, in the sense that it was transformational for him too, because everything after Love Supreme was different. Like there's a pre and post Love Supreme in his catalog. And so it's a record I always look at as a pinnacle of creative accomplishment, but also a pinnacle of personal expression and cultural expression, artistic expression. And so, I mean, my wife and I, we play this record all the time. When things are good, we play the record. We play it when it's bad. We play it when we need to pray and meditate. We play it when we're having fun. I mean, it's just a staple in our lives and has been so for decades. So I chose the first movement, Acknowledgement, from A Love Supreme, because the way it opens and the way it develops is beautiful. And it's incidentally the first extended work that Coltrane ever composed. And so as a composer who came from the quote unquote jazz world and started to compose long form, this was also instructive in that way too. So it's one of the most influential records in my work.
Oh my gosh, the memory of that tune.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Like there's so many times I have played that. So as soon as it started, like I could just follow every note because it's interesting that you say that you play that for all the occasions. I have really particular times where I play Love Supreme, which is usually my saddest times. Maybe I'm just sad all the time, so I don't know. It's it's interesting. You make me also remember Hank Marr, who I studied with for a couple of years. Rest in peace, Hank Marr, B3 organ, and also Marble Gang, right? And Jazz and Eggs, and just really allowing for jazz to, or what we think we call jazz, or what we think we know about jazz, to sort of just wash over us. Jazz grew me up in college. Like I'm trained as a classical musician, and I don't know, jazz grew me up in college. So this just, I don't know, this, but it hits different now. So
Yeah, this is the first jazz record I knew was a jazz record because my dad would play it nonstop and would return to it just with immense regularity. It was like This and Kind of Blue and Out to Lunch, Dolphy record. But weirdly, a weird connection I have to Love Supreme is that when I got a little older, my brain can't get off of the bass line, as it opens up. And so I was like, gosh, I got to find, like what Jimmy Garrison been doing. And I think this is maybe a good companion piece. I think the same year, I think Illumination came out the same year as Love Supreme, this album that Garrison released with like McCoy Tyner on piano and Elvin Jones on drums. Yeah. And that album is like obviously lesser known, but it was the first time I felt like I found, the way that I came to jazz was always through the lens of my pops, and through the great Robert Parrish, the music instructor who I certainly frustrated in my youth when I was not interested in practicing trumpet as much as he would like me to. I still, I live in King Lincoln, and sometimes I drive past his old studio, and I'm like, man, I should like pop in one day and just be like, I'm sorry, bro, like, I definitely stressed you out when I was a kid. But Illumination was kind of the first album of jazz that I just discovered through digging on the crates of my own when I was like 17 or 18. And that also reshaped my relationship with it, where it felt like it was something that could be mine too. And so it's interesting how Love Supreme was undoubtedly like a record of my parents, but through my kind of curiosity, it led me to records that were my own, which I think is how like musical lineage, particularly among Black musicians, particularly in the collaborative genre, works.
I like how you like to write on the bass, Hanif. I like to write on the cymbals and the hi-hats, and that constant that is so moving. And Dr. Lomax, I hear you playing like that. I love it. The only other thing I have to say, which is not nearly as intelligent, is that I like to claim that I might have been John Coltrane in a past life because we have the same birthday. So I came back with a little bit.
Yeah, I got to study with Elvin a little bit. I had 3 lessons with him, and the most significant were the first and the last. The first one, he didn't say one word to me, but he let me sit next to him for like 3 hours while he signed autographs and talked to other people. And then at the end, he looked at me and said, "Did you get what you need, kid?" And I was like, "Yes, sir." I didn't know what he meant. And then the last time I saw him was about a year or 2 before he died in New Orleans. And he played my drums, and I'll never sell that kit. It's sitting right over here. And he heard me play. He walks in, he says, "You got it." And so that, you talk about old school, just seeing whatever he saw in me and let me sit next to him and absorb that energy, you know. And yeah, I play a lot like him because he was probably the most influential drummer in my life that I met, aside from Tony Williams, who I never met. But you mentioned Kind of Blue. Tony Williams was the drummer after Joe Chambers in Miles Davis's band. But to have him tell me I got it, you know, it made that record even more special, you know.
A wild thing, there was an essay in the book that I pulled that was about Black drummers, and I didn't pull it because I just wasn't getting to what I was trying to think about, which is like, you know, it's interesting because the drum is something that I grew up revering. Like my brother played drums, my dad played with like Tony West, you know, this kind of thing. But then the kind of like, I don't even want to say white because I think that centers whiteness in a weird way, but the American idea of the drummer in the canon of American music is so different from the kind of spiritual and up close, intimate nature of drumming that I saw performed from Black drummers. It's always like, well, you know, Keith Moon was wild and like, you know, John Bonham was a maniac, all this kind of stuff, which yes, true, fine. But I think that the drumming of Black folks I knew was always, and there's obvious reasons for this, clear reasons for this. But I always spent time, and through working on this essay, I spent time wondering about that disconnect, and why not more people think about Black drumming as a specific spiritual reconnection.
I just think about why more people don't think about all of these artists that you are writing about in this book, right? Like there's just so many sort of sweet spots, just things where you are interweaving just really sort of holding a lot of space for grief, and holding a lot of space for love, and space for love in these really unexpected, like it's like, oh, this is about love, and you know, and you think you're encountering something. I mean, the Wu-Tang essays, like, I mean, just how you talk about, I mean, just right, the kiss and the whole, I mean, it's like you're just holding abundance. I mean, even this, right, the spades, like you're just holding or even conflict, right, and fights, like this, how there's just so much space you hold for love. And it's just every essay is just so there's an outpouring and a definitely a reverence, but there's just it's deeply intimate and deeply personal, and we don't get to hear about Black artists in this way. So much is, a lot of people are focusing so much on pain and the tragedy aspect, and you deal with that, right? You deal with that, but you're riding in the same way that you all were talking about, sort of riding a bass line or riding a cymbal, or, you know, you're riding this really interesting line and pushing back against the way that artists are both seen and not seen, and you just give such abundant love. And I don't know, I'd love for you to just even talk about that, because there were points where I was like, and more love, and you just give so much in this book to these artists that I don't know, I was just struck by that, and how we don't get to be seen in that way. Black artists don't get to be seen in that way. And you said, not on my watch.
Yeah, I mean, I think some ways love, and I don't mean like broad capital L love with like cartoon hearts, but I mean like a rigorous engagement with our affections can correct the record of our existences and our ancestors' existences. And I mean, a big thing that I always return to when talking about this book is the Ellen Willis, or the Ellen Armstrong problem, where, you know, for those who haven't read or whatever, there's a chapter on the magical Negro concept. And shout out to, you know, Scott Woods, a friend and mentor who has orbited the magical Negro concept much better than I did, far longer than I have. But I was thinking, you know, there was a point where the phrase Black girl magic had been commodified, right? And so there was this backlash to it where Black women were maybe rightfully being like, well, we're not really these magical beings. And I was like, yeah, I mean, absolutely. But then as I was on a run like the next day, I was like, but I bet there's like a Black woman who was like the first Black Black woman to do magic somewhere. And I found out about Ellen Armstrong, and she was performing very real miracles out of love for her people. And her story is so under archived and underreported. And that bugged me. And I think it just happens. I mean, I ran into that clearly more with Black women in this book than anyone else. Like Josephine Baker, the title comes from Josephine Baker's speech at the March on Washington. And the history of the March on Washington has been so male-centered. I mean, she's the only woman who spoke at the March on Washington, but I feel like most people don't actually know she did speak at the March on Washington. And that also bothered me. And so my affection for these stories and these people propelled me towards a corrective point, but also I spent a lot of time considering the ways I viewed love. I mean, the Raekwon Ghostface thing is kind of perfect because I remember being a kid and I remember watching the Triumph video and I remember Ghostface kissing Raekwon and I remember being like, oh, those two dudes love each other. You know what I mean? And like, this is how the exuberance there is like something I think I can bring myself to feel for the people I'm close to. And it was so funny watching, I don't really watch the Versus things all that much because they're not that exciting. I feel bad, but the Earth, Wind, and Fire one was cool. But most of the times but I watched some of the Raekwon and Ghostface one and it was so like touching how in awe of each other they still are. And I think like awe and wonder is a type of love or like a really grounding point for love. Like I remember the first time I like sat in the back of the room at Righting Wrongs when it was still up in the loft here in King Lincoln. And the first time I saw like Jamal May read poems. And I was like, I am in awe of what's happening in front of me. And that's kind of love. That's something close to love. And so I think the exercising of awe and wonder decentered my ego a bit and decentered my desire to tell a painful story, which I didn't really have much of a desire to do that anyway. But what little desire there was, it went away when it was like, there's something bigger at play here than me invested in like what I can make people feel.
Paisha, when do you feel your most, like when you're like, when do you kind of get that sense? Like, do you have that sense of kind of like just this idea around Black artists and love and sort of being attached to maybe Black artists kind of, or you know, artists that identify as Black, right? Makers, creatives, and really not getting this space to be seen as those that love and who are loved.
Yeah. Thank you for asking, because I was thinking about the way I was gonna actually answer that in my own way, not knowing that you would ask. But the first thing is back to Black drummers. I think it's incredibly important for us as people to really, really understand. I mean, we know in this room, and I think, you know, those of us like us in the arts, we know this, but it really, Black drumming really drives everything else in our music. And so honey, first of all, I'm glad that you are a Columbus resident and that you wrote this book, because so I'm going to talk about the blues. We and you know, people can't figure out what the difference is between this gentrified, this white, you know, I don't even know what to call it. It's not the blues. It's been taken over. It's been kidnapped, and it's been turned into not the blues, but it is what is now running around town with this title. And this is no slight. It's a music. It's its own form of music. And you know, it has its place, and it makes some people very happy. But when you are the blues, and your very beat of your heart and your ancestry is steeped in the rhythm of those blues, and it just sounds different. I mean, you can tell. And that's, you know, I sometimes call the other thing the Stevie Ray Vaughan effect, because when people say the blues, here comes everybody, you know, Eric Clapton, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and just to bring in women, and this goes a step away from the blues and into rock, but Sister Rosetta Tharpe was out here playing a Gibson SG guitar, y'all. And she wasn't just playing that, she was shredding that guitar.
Playing the hell out of that guitar.
The hell. You know, solos and everything. And I think it was only 3 years ago that she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is tragic. And I get so excited, so let me just breathe. But we were just talking about trying to find a Black blues jam around here. And, you know, there's that new one now where there's a very popular vocal sound. And it sounds like it came from like Adele. And it sounds like it comes from people who are trying to sound like Adele, who, you know, just like many other artists, we said this person has soul. Now they're singing. Now we're calling this soul music. And, you know, for me, it's just, it's very like, I become very passionate about, you know, just the kidnapping and the swiping of our art form. And it goes back to the drumming. I feel like you can hear the difference. And the difference can be traced back to the drumming.
I agree. A couple of things that you all kind of bring to mind. One, Branford Marsalis asked Elvin Jones how he could reach the level of virtuosic intensity that he did in his own playing with John Coltrane, and talk about the love piece. Elvin said, you got to be willing to die for your brother, you know, in order to get to that. So, I mean, that's love beyond love beyond love. You know what I mean? No, and then, you know, we are the blues people. Imamu and Mary Baraka called us the blues people. He wrote the book. And so everything we play is the blues. Rock and roll is the blues. Black art music, whether it's concert music or improvised music, spontaneous composition, it's the blues. That's why I have a problem with the word jazz, because jazz represents to me the sterile academic approach that's taught in schools and not the oral tradition from which the music comes from. The way Hanif and Dion write, that's the blues, right? So, I mean, everything we produce is the blues, because blues as a idea is the culture itself, not a music, not a word, not a phrase. It's just what we do, it's who we are, right? Everything we play, everything we sing, everything we say is the blues, you know? And I think that is something that people do try to copy in a lot of ways, but they can't because they don't live that life. You know, having read your work, Hanif, and I've even set some of Dion's work in my art music, I chose her work and her words because the way she puts words together represents an experience that I have lived. And that's, I think, a very important thing. You can't play those rhythms. You can't sing, you know, those words, those sounds. You can't do that on the guitar like Sister Rosetta Tharpe unless you've lived that life,
right?
You know, and that's what I respect about all of you. All of your work comes from that experience, and that's what separates what we do from what folks who do great stuff, but it's just not the same because the connection isn't the same. That experience is not the same, you know?
Yeah, and Paisha, I think you're passionate about this is necessary because that too is a correction of the record, right? Where, you know, people literally, as we speak right now, today on the internet, are once again regurgitating this argument about is Outkast better than the Beatles, instead of asking, why the fuck are we still centering the Beatles as a marker of music quality, and skipping over the fact that Outkast is a blues group, a funk group. Outkast pulls more from Dayton, Ohio than Liverpool. You know what I mean?
Word.
But because there's not any of these corrections, now I'm all passionate. When Paisha was talking, my hands were sweating. I was like, I gotta, especially because you mentioned the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I was the past, like, I'm supposed to be on the committee for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but this year I was like, listen, I'm not going to argue with y'all about why Fela Kuti should be like, the hall should be named after him. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to argue with y'all about putting this man in the Hall of Fame. So I just like abandoned my ballot. But that's the kind of thing, though, right? About it's not just about working twice as hard. It's about I'm talking about Black musicians. It's also about having to remind people twice. You all know how much life Little Richard wasted reminding people what he created or what he did. That's just like, so there's some of that in the book too, like the rage I felt and always will feel watching and reading old Little Richard interviews where like he just has to continually. And then people didn't understand it. People were like, well, he's so boastful or he's so arrogant. It's like, I mean, wouldn't you be? You want that? You want Little Richard to be humble? It doesn't make sense. Then that up.
And even on the flip side, Ruth and I just watched the Tina Turner documentary and how throughout all of her success, everybody wanted to talk about Ike.
Yeah.
It's like Tina did so much more after Ike. Like she actually became Tina post Ike. And nobody wanted to talk about that evolution and growth. It seems like for Black artists in particular, and this might be true of others, but I don't pay attention to everybody else. I pay attention to us. The box is so small and finite, and you're either this or you're that. You can't be both. And our experience is such that, our work, that's why it's the blues. The blues doesn't have a form. Like I literally sat and watched David Honeyboy Edwards, a Delta blues musician, one of the last. He was in his 90s. This was back in like 2006 or something like that. Play 7 courses of the blues, and not one time did he play 12 measure blues, which is the codified version of it. Thank you, W.C. Handy. He played a 3 measure blues. He played a 7 measure blues. He played a 13.5 bar blues. I mean, never was it 12 because the music, the form of that verse fit the story that he was telling at the macro level. And that's the thing that we have that folks don't understand. We do what we do because we must.
Oh, and we exist in multitudes, right? And so there isn't this ability to be these multiple things. And Hanif, you get at that quite a bit, right? Like I'm thinking of even just this particular conversation, I'm thinking of when you write about Mary Clayton, right? And Give Me Shelter. I mean, this is inside of that essay, right? This whole conversation is exactly inside of that essay, and how you talk about being seen and being invisible at the same time, and how people have no idea what it's like to exist as a Black person in this here America in these kinds of conditions, to be both very visible and then invisible at the same time. You talk about it with your the employer. I love like how you even refer to like the employer, but you deal with it in Mary Clayton. And then you also, I was struck and I couldn't get how you dealt with Whitney Houston. The multitudes, right? And maybe I'm thinking of it just because they both, obviously rooted in gospel, obviously sort of bringing that to the table, but then having to straddle these worlds. I mean, obviously Mary Clayton, a different kind of music, rock music, but then Whitney with a kind of pop sound, and having to sort of straddle this, and then having to deal with the critique and the criticism. And I love a good critique, an offering. I love that. But what she had to endure, this kind of, it's not even enough to call it code switching. It's not even enough to kind of sort of really feel for how you write about Whitney Houston, and people being like, well, you're complicit with this, and we can reject you over here, but wait, we love this over here. And what's the person to do, right? Like how can you, we hold these many things, and America does not allow us to be all these things. Like we can't exist in multitudes. We're either this or that. And somehow America gets to determine that by the absence of the history, by the absence by not telling the story, you get one story and you think that is what it is to be a Black woman in America. No,
Right.
you have no idea all the things, all the ways that one might exist as one who identifies as a Black woman in America, but you wouldn't know because the stories have been so narrow, right? Or erased.
Or erased, yeah. Like hypervisible as a monolith, invisible as an individual, I think is
Absolutely.
kind of where, yeah. For the sake of Paisha, will you talk about the clip you chose? And can we watch it?
Yeah, I'd love that, especially as close as we just left the topic of Tina Turner. Because I was trying to decide and look for which Tina Turner performance I wanted to share. Especially given that she's announced that she's not well and
It's done, yeah.
she's done. But turns out we're not gonna. I just wanted to lift her up because I was going to anyway. But I think enough of us know about Tina Turner. Who I would like to see get more attention is Betty Lavette. And so this clip is Betty Lavette. She is coming to. Before we started, I just want to set it up a little bit. So this is how she's walking onto the stage at the Kennedy Center Honors. And first of all, just the power in her being as she walked onto that stage says a lot. And it's I saw the video and learned about her before I read her book, A Woman Like Me. Has anybody in here read that? I should have known you had read it, Hanif. So so you learn about Betty Lavette in this book that she really did. She should have been on 20 Feet from Stardom. She really did go through everything you can possibly think of in her family. You know, she had a daughter. She really never wanted to be a mother. So her mom raised her daughter. You know, she found herself one time. The chapter opens up, someone's hanging her over like the edge of a balcony, about to drop her. You know, all while knowing and being convinced that she was here to sing. And being fully dedicated to that, but always being in the shadow of who she calls Diane Ross in the book. She really just kept calling Diana Ross Diane. Just the shade that keeps coming from her.
Yeah, she wasn't fucking with Diana Ross at all in the book. It was wild.
Or Aretha, like she, you know, you hear her talking about these people and you get a real, there's a, you know, I could go on, but get the book, it's good. But just the fact too that it took her, she was in the shadows for so long, and then she's come to this place. She's in her 60s when a young like white guy from somewhere else reaches out, and next thing you know, Betty Lavette's doing what she's doing now. Um, but the fact that you get to see her now walk onto this stage and sing the holy hell out of this song. And we can talk about it a little more after it's over. So, Leanne, it's okay to go ahead and play it. Thank you.
I'm so happy. Paisha, can I just say I'm so happy that when I saw that clip, that was what your clip was. I was so happy because I was pulled towards Betty Lavette's book when I was working on Little Devil, but not in the chapter on Mary Clayton, actually, in the chapter about beef, the James Brown and Joe Tex chapter, because she was a part of the James Brown Review. And I'd kind of been deep into the archives of everyone who was a part of the James Brown Review because I was trying to find out more about B. Ford, yet another Black woman singer whose history is next to nothing on the internet. And I found Betty Lavette and I found this book, and then I found her late career recordings or current career recordings, and was just blown away, and particularly by her repurposing of song. There's this thing Nina Simone does that I like a lot, where it feels like one of the earliest musical memories I have is hearing Nina Simone's version of Pirate Jenny and being horrified by it, because I thought it was about like a slave ship coming to shore, right? And what little I knew about slavery at that age, it was just all horrifying. But that's actually Nina Simone's gift, right? Is like taking songs that are not ours and making them like distinctly ours, like Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair, right? Which was like a Scottish traditional song and making that a distinctly our song. And I feel like Betty Lavette has some of that spirit in her work.
Yeah, she really does. I can't, like, I never knew that song before. So then when I tried to go hear their version, it can't even do it. It can't do it. So yeah.
Which I will say, I also think that kind of transformation is also um, the transformation of song, or the retransmitting and rearticulation of song, is something so fascinating to me among Black singers who I'm sure it's not always, I'm sure it's respectful sometimes, but it's very much like you hear something, you're like, no. There's like something's missing. And then you pursue the thing that's missing, right? That's always what drew me to Nina Simone's work, is that it always felt like she was hearing some shit and like in her head thinking, I can maybe do a little bit better than that.
I don't even know if it's about better. I think it's about the filter we have, and the lens that we have because of the life lived. It's really interesting because in the African context, what we now in the West consider art always had a functional purpose that was applied to the stuff of human activity, right? So there was never a song apart from an activity, or even a poem apart from an activity, or what have you. So words and music always accompanied dance and accompanied ceremony and all of those things. And so when you think about music as function, and you think about the lives a lot of these artists have lived, and that the music has to come from that lived experience as a function of their being, it just goes into this blender and it comes out something beautiful, even when it's not beautiful. You could argue that technically a lot of those folks can't sing. Tina Turner, a lot of folks, but it's not about like that bel canto, classical, pristine approach to the song, right? And their vocal technique. It's about how their ability to express through their voice communicates not just how they feel, but something in that song that other folks might not have found because they don't have that same lens.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up about being able to sing or not, because, just to be transparent, this is another reason why I love Betty Lavette and Tina Turner and, the non-Beyoncés of the singing vocal world. Um, and I think they give us a space. I resonate. I can't sing like that. I can, people still pay money and they'll come and listen to me, but it has to be for something else that I have to offer. And I really appreciate people like her who have gone before me and shown me that this is possible, that there's room for my art in this world. And Betty Lavette adds another layer, just like Sharon Jones and, even Charles Bradley, but just to continue to lift up the women. It's that age and generational component of when you are expected to be successful by a certain age. Um, and you're not, you know, people don't expect that at age 62, you're going to finally get your big break. And so it's just very inspiring and encouraging to see these women blaze these trails for the rest of us.
I also really like this idea. I love that, Paisha, and I appreciate this idea around the fact that sort of we come from a tradition, a cultural tradition where art and making and imagination are not separated out from life, from just the breath, and how art in this context, this American context, gets pulled into a place that's outside of us and then gets devalued really the entire time, right? And so to sort of pull something that is in so many cultures, not even just ours, but in many cultures, a way of life, there's not maybe a word or a discipline for just art, right? Art is a part of living, is a part of breathing, is a part of who you are. And I think that's what's hard. We're having this conversation, and I have to put on my art educator hat, right? And think about how often you all know I work with youth so much, right? And I work at the university, and I'm in a museum, and and so I'm thinking so much about the decline of art education over the past 50 years because there's just not a place for it. What happens, the thing that you do that is just like your breath, there's not a place for it. I mean, do you stop breathing? What does that really mean? And so I guess as I'm sitting here thinking about these memories that we're stirring up and what this book has stirred up inside of us, I think so much about who won't get to see that just because it won't be accessible to them in some way because it's just not value. Like, what's art really doing? I mean, I'd love to be having that conversation. I mean, we don't have time for that, right? But like, what's art really doing in this society? And I would say it's documenting for sure. It is the breath that we breathe. It is pushing us forward. It's doing a heavy lift. And that too is a hard but invisible labor, I would say.
I also think, and I know I got to be conscious of time. I was going to share a video, but I'm not going to because I would rather, we don't have a lot of time left. And I was just going to show some Soul Train lines because that's what my life has been. I've been watching Soul Train lines for like 2 years now, nonstop. But I also want to ask each of you if you had a performance of your own. What's so interesting for me writing this book was that I was so detached from my own ideas of my own performance, even though I'm someone who has stood on a stage and has, and I wondered if y'all had performances of your own that you feel especially good about, like a single one or a single couple that you felt like brought you closer to whatever your hopes for your performed self are.
Mine was my most recent, and the only one I can think of that was exciting. Like I felt like I could, I deserved to be here against this constant like imposter syndrome. Was at Counterfeit Madison's Aretha Franklin tribute. I kind of nailed it. I was like, thank you. We can keep going now.
I agree with that assessment. You did nail that.
For sure. I'm fortunate to play with some of the best musicians in the world. And so we have a lot of great nights. My concern has always been how the work is presented to the audience in a way that's respectful. And I think there have been 2 times that come to mind where I feel like it happened. One was at the Lincoln with the WEC sponsored concert of the 400 premiere. And the other was when we played Severance Hall a year later. It's just being in those places and having that kind of import placed on your work after playing clubs and everything for 25 years or so. It makes you feel not like you've arrived, but like you're not crazy because you expect your work to be respected in a different way.
Getting real quick, that Wex show at the Ling was so memorable in part because getting a ticket was wild for me. I was one of the people who like waited just a little too long, not even day of though. I was like, I'll get a ticket a few days before the show. And I had to like call, and I'm not I'll call it a favor kind of person, but I had to like call people. I had to call in favors to get tickets to that show. And I could only get one, I was like, okay, me and my homie come. And they're like, nah, we only got one for you. And that show was stunning, obviously. And that show was rejuvenating in a lot of ways. But I always remember like being so excited that the city broadly, not that I underestimated that people would want to go, but I was like, I can get a ticket a few days before. And it was like impossible. And that in and of itself was kind of beautiful.
It was very cool. It was very cool.
I would probably align with Mark. There's just so many good memories. There's a couple that stand out. I don't know if you all remember Charles Cooper. He's in Spain right now, playing, but there was an amazing set we had in front of the old Ohio Union at OSU, before the new building that exists now, that full band, DJ, poet. It was amazing. Back when OSU used to do block parties, and block parties used to look a particular kind of way. And I just missed, Mark, I don't know if you remember Friday nights at Barrister Hall off of High Street, and
Perez Whitted or Eddie Baird.
Perez Whitted, Eddie Baird, we'd sit in on sets. I mean, those nights were good. I lived for those Friday nights at Barrister Hall when I could show up with my voice and my poetry and sit in on a set as if I had an instrument.
I love that.
And you have an instrument.
This is so great. I asked that in part because I think that you all are people who have memorable performances for me. And that's as someone who came up in the various eras of the Columbus art scene. When I was a kid, again, my dad and brother were drumming and, and going to listen to jazz and all that. And, as a teen, I was on the punk scene here and all that. And then I kind of fell into the poetry community in an era. And I think I'm always kind of charting through memorable Columbus performances or performances where I got to watch a person evolve into a different version of themselves. I will never forget the late, great Marshawn McCarroll, who, so much of, I find myself reminding people, but also myself that, for all of Marshawn's work as an activist, he's also just an immensely skilled writer. And I feel like that gets kind of lost in the work, but I remember watching him kind of be one of the Mosaic kids who would come to Righting Wrongs and kind of read off the phone and look down and occasionally look up to 3 years later, just a stunning performer of his own work and coming into himself. And I think there's something I'm getting at about lineage of performance, Black performance in this city specifically, that I feel, not that I don't really feel old yet, at least not now. I feel in the mornings I'm feeling increasingly older. But it does feel I'm on the verge of entering 2.5 decades of performance. And I'm wondering real quick, I actually don't know what we're doing on time. Is 8:15 our limit here?
We're at 8:03, honey. So if we have 8:15, you can show us that clip.
Oh,
just saying. I mean,
okay, real quick, I'll go through this. I want to hear y'all's response to this, and then I'll show some Soul Train things. But how do y'all see performance in this city specifically evolving in your time? Because y'all have, I know Mark and Dion, y'all have been doing this longer than I have, not a ton longer, but I feel like there's enough of a generational divide where y'all have seen a lot more up close than I have.
I'm fitting to sound real old. In the 80s and 90s, I felt like you could play anywhere, any day of the week, any kind of music. When I was in high school in the 90s, I would go from church on Sunday to playing with a rock band that night, to playing, at a supper club on Monday and Tuesday with singers, playing big band on Wednesday, playing at with a Latino country band kind of thing on Thursday. There was just everything to play. And I'm not on the scene like I used to be, but I don't feel like there are that many venues, even pre-COVID, where you could just go hear music live like you could back then. So I would say in a lot of ways, the scene has devolved, but things are so much more niche now. And so I know there are a lot of pockets where you can go hear what you want to hear, but I don't feel like the scene is as connected as it used to be.
If you're gonna sound old, Mark, I hesitate to even speak, but I got to Columbus. I'm from Cleveland, and that resonates with me, Mark, just having a lot of access to live music. And when I got to Columbus in the early 90s, live music was so plentiful, and all kinds of live music. And I really miss collaborations. And I miss when you could sit in on a set. Like, I liked sitting in on a set and seeing other people sit in on sets. I love to see the kinds of collaborations, and not that that's not possible. I think we're in a different time. I'd like to see us again taking those kinds of risks and allowing ourselves to be multitudes and interdisciplinary. So I don't know. I guess I kind of miss that. Like, where can you show up on at a set that folks are playing straight ahead? Folks are doing a thing, and I could show up with some poems and my voice and get in on a set, and not just me, but many others. There was just space. There was space and room. And when could you sort of walk into a space and just a lot could be said. You write about this, Hanif. A lot could be said with just looking at someone as like the person who looked at your sneakers and was like, yeah, I see you, right? And y'all didn't even have to say anything. You just glanced at it. Those kinds of spaces existed. And, I don't know what happens as we emerge out of or beyond, right? Maybe not out, but beyond whatever the current condition is. But I miss live music. I miss live art. I miss encountering and happenings and things like that. I hope we don't forget that art can exist that way. And this town has that. This town has so many creatives and artists. So.
Do y'all mind if I hop in and ask some of the questions from our Q&A?
No, hop on in.
Cool, thanks. So I'll just go ahead and read them aloud here, since I don't think they get, everyone can see them. So we had one question from Matthew here. He says, Hanif, yesterday during your WEX talk, you mentioned you were listening to isolated drum tracks from Stevie Wonder, which sent him down a rabbit hole. And he would love to hear you and Mark talk about that, or like nerd out a little bit.
Well, it's an embarrassing time for me, I think, generally speaking. I told my friend about this, and she was like, I think you've like crossed over into like some abnormal music nerd type shit. Well, what happened was I got really fascinated with the drums on Knocks Me Off My Feet, and the drummer on Knocks Me Off My Feet. And then I just noticed these tonal shifts in Stevie Wonder's drums throughout his golden era, throughout that 70s golden era. And so I asked a friend, I called in a favor. This isn't even like a normal favor. This is a weird ass favor. I called in a favor and asked a friend if they could like isolate all the drum tracks from Talking Book, Intervisions, and Songs of the Key of Life, and then send them to me. And that's how I've been spending some of my days, just kind of immersed in. And I'm someone who likes isolated. A big part of working on the Mary Clayton essay was listening to the isolated Mary Clayton vocal in Gimme Shelter, because what you don't hear, on Gimme Shelter, you hear Mary Clayton's voice crack, right? But you hear it crack on the big murder word, right? But it actually cracks a little before that. You just can't hear it without the vocals being isolated. So like the big crack is secondary to the crack before. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to nerd out about this with Mark. I'm actually embarrassed that I'm listening to Stevie Wonder drum tracks and like talking about it with someone who's like a literal drummer. But that is how I've been spending at least an hour of my day, kind of like charting through Stevie Wonder's drum journey through the 70s.
Oh, the fun thing about that in particular, I haven't listened to all of those records in his golden era, but I have listened to some of the isolated drum tracks, especially the ones he's playing on, and you can hear like his headphones, you can hear him humming, and you for me as a drummer, you hear his process, because he's not playing drums the way a drummer would. He's playing drums the way a composer would. Like, he's playing the song. And so the stuff he's doing on his hi-hat is not stuff you would normally do just because, but he's hearing the whole song. And that's amazing. It shifted the way I play drums.
I almost like slammed my fist on the table in exuberance, because you said the thing that I was like, so the reason I got the drum tracks is because I wanted to be able to delineate when he's playing and when he's not playing. Because a lot of his album credits, he would sometimes like credit other musicians, maybe out of some like false humility, to be like, yeah, I didn't play everything, when really he played everything. And so I wanted to be able to try to differentiate when he's playing. And that's exactly right. Like when you hear, he's playing because you can hear some light humming a bit. And that's the exact thing. Like he's playing not like a drum. You said it perfectly. He's playing not like a drummer, but like a composer, where he's like thinking through the process a bit.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Matthew said in the chat, you can hear the kick pedal squeak. Yeah. I mean, and to your point about the tonal shifts, he's not playing the same drum set.
Nope, not at all.
And some people are out there enough. I'm not there yet, where you can tell what drum set he's playing, but he's also not playing great equipment. But he's making it work. He's making it in the
songs like Key of Life. He's playing there are like a bunch of different drum sets played, and some of them sound great. Some of them don't sound great at all. You know what I mean? And so that's wild to me too, that the ear was not tuned to just like, play the good drum set, play the one that sounds okay, instead of all these kind of like mediocre to bad.
We grew up in black churches. You know what I'm saying? We never had great drum sets, but we made them work.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like with those analog recordings, it's all about like what they left in, because like a lot of the digital recordings now, like the tendency is to like slice out all the life, and you don't hear those little nuances.
Noise is good.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to relay another question here from Jordan. So he says, when you were talking about Black artists tapping into a previously undiscovered element of a song, it brought to mind Earth, Wind, and Fire's cover of the Beatles' "Gotta Get You Into My Life," which he only recently learned was a cover. And so he feels like the Earth, Wind, and Fire is the definitive version, and he doesn't believe that music is so much written as it is discovered. So as performers, have you had that experience yourself of discovering the song?
I mean, always, I think, because it's like so much of what I grew up hearing were Black artists who in the 60s, particularly in the 50s and 60s or 60s and 70s, were singing the work of other people. I mean, I of course knew "Give Me Shelter" first as a Stones song, or like, honestly, even the Stones version of "Give Me Shelter" is a Mary Clayton song, to be clear. But Mary Clayton recorded a version of it just by herself, which is an entirely different song. I mean, it's more gospel, it's less violent, like sonically violent. And I think that's just been the history of my understanding with music, where it's like, I mean, Maxwell, the perfect example of this is Maxwell doing, and I love Kate Bush, like a lot, but Maxwell's version of this woman's work is like otherworldly. And this woman's work is not a bullshit Kate Bush song. That's like a top 10 Kate Bush song. And Maxwell's version just blows it out of the water. And I am always so amazed at when people come to the Kate Bush version and are like, oh, this is all right. But that's the version, the Maxwell, particularly the Maxwell unplugged version, which is just another, I mean, it's like you're floating, like you're in the air, And so, yeah, I have that moment a lot.
I feel like as a songwriter, I don't know how to get around discovering the song, because before I think writing was ever even a possibility in my mind, I was learning gospel covers, learning what the choir was singing, learning the solo parts to Hezekiah Walker. Power belongs to God. That's a lot of lyrics. There's like a bunch of lyrics in there. So discovering the song seems like more of an education for me, like Dr. Lomax in the Black church, of just, learning what other people are doing.
I'll add two quick things. I wrote the record Tales of the Black Experience in 1998, and we didn't tour it until 2019 into 2020, before going into COVID. And that's music I've lived with for 20 years, and we still discovered all kind of nuggets in that work, because we never got to really play it until 20 years later. And so what does it mean to come at the work in your 40s instead of in your 20s? I mean, all of those things. But one of the songs that I have fun discovering is young, gifted, and Black. You know, the Nina Simone, the Donny Hathaway, the Aretha Franklin, and so many other people, you know, and it's all, that song belongs to everybody who sang it because they all did it their way.
I love that notion of coming to something later, being trained as a classical musician, and also growing up in the church and having a certain kind of sound that you're around, and then encountering jazz later in life, and then listening to that pretty exclusively in college, and just bought up everything I could at used kids, everything I could get my hands on at used kids because it was so cheap and accessible and across the street. And just really discovered music that I had not been, I just wasn't exposed to it. And, you know, I'm really thankful for the art education I received in public school growing up, and a strong music education. And then also got a chance to study at the Cleveland Institute of Music, but jazz wasn't accessible there. It was around me, but I hadn't tapped into it in the way that I did later on in life. And like I said, it just really raised me. I grew up in a way learning. My ear grew up, and then that, I don't know, in some ways taught me how to write. I had been writing, but jazz taught me how to write.
So I don't want to keep on talking, but I need to talk about Gladys Knight real quick for two reasons. Because I want to, but also my partner's watching and maybe on Facebook Live reminded me about how Gladys Knight, she will sing, she will turn a song into a gospel song. She can't even help it. The way she did Grandma's Hands, Use Me, and Please Send Me Someone to Love with BB King. Like, she took this man's song on the same stage with him and just blew it out of the water. So I just wanted to drop that in there real quick.
That's also the difference between an artist and a performer. You know, a performer is someone who can take the song and render it, you know, in an entertaining and pleasing way, you know, but it's not always nourishing. Artists, it's like Michael Jackson said in This Is It has to be fully nourished. You know, artists can take that material and just do whatever they do with it and make it something that's fully nourishing. And it changes it, and it changes you. You know, you can always discover songs. That's fun.
Thank you for this book, Hanif. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you for bringing us together for this.
Of course. Thanks, y'all.
For real wants to see the Soul Train clips.
I will. Here's what I'll do. I will put the link to the clips. So I wanted to play two of my favorite Soul Train lines. Don Cornelius loved Ohioans, by the way. He loved Ohio funk bands. And so he played, like, the Mighty OJs were in the Soul Train line all of the time. And one of my favorites is this one from the 70s that is in the chat now. And then another one from the 80s is Let It Whip, one by Daz Band, also Ohioans from Cleveland. Man gets tired of eating. Where they are kind of, in the two things I was going to show were the differences in the Soul Train lines, where in the 70s, yes, shout out to WGN, which is how the only way I saw Soul Train when I was a kid was WGN reruns. Major shout out to WGN, because if you didn't have cable, you know what I mean? If you didn't have cable in Ohio, you could still get WGN, which is probably how we got all these fucking Chicago Bulls fans in my era. But those two lines are interesting because I love the communal nature of the 70s Soul Train line. And then in the 80s, it became more individual, more about props and less about like propelling oneself forward down the line. I kind of blame Michael Jackson for this, but you know, maybe that's not the case. But I will say that, like, I recently talked to the Soul Train scholar, Erica Blount-Danois, who wrote a brilliant book about Soul Train. And she said something to me that had never occurred to me, where I was like, you know, I was doing my complaining. I was like, oh, in the 80s and 90s, no one's it's all about props and no one's like dancing down the line. Everyone's kind of just stationary until the camera cuts off them. She's like, well, Hanif, it is very hard to dance on rhythm while walking forward. You know, it's like why, and she's like, and that's why so many people in the 70s needed a partner to keep them on time. In the minute it became like an individual thing with fewer partners, people just like couldn't figure out how to do their like elaborate dance moves while also in a propulsive motion. And that kind of blew my mind and made me think about the Soul Train line differently. But those are the two clips. Help you dig them and watch them when you got time.
Well, thank you so much, Hanif, Paisha, Dr. Mark Lomax, Dionne Custer Edwards, for sharing, all this great stuff with us tonight. I wish we could go all night and just keep talking, but yeah.
Thanks, and thanks, y'all. All three of y'all. This meant the world to me. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Good night, everybody.